At our family counseling session, my in-laws issued an ultimatum to their son about my children from my first marriage. Choose between your real family and those leftover kids. You can't have both taking up space in our family legacy, my mother-in-law declared. I calmly asked if they were certain about forcing that choice, then revealed the trust fund documents showing that my baggage children had just inherited $2 million each from their late grandfather's estate, money that would now never benefit the family that rejected them. I never imagined that sitting in Dr. Martinez's beige office would become the moment my in-laws finally revealed their true colors. For 3 years, I'd endured their passive-aggressive comments about my children from my first marriage, always delivered with sugar-sweet smiles that never reached their eyes. But that Tuesday afternoon in March, with rain pattering against the windows, Margaret and Robert Hendricks decided to drop all pretense. My husband, David, sat rigidly beside me on the leather couch, his hands clasped so tightly his knuckles had gone white. Across from us, his parents occupied matching chairs like judges at a tribunal. Margaret wore her signature Chanel suit, the navy one she saved for what she called serious family business. Robert had chosen his courthouse attire, the same charcoal gray ensemble he'd worn as a family court judge for 30 years before retiring. "Let's address the elephant in the room," Margaret began, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "This marriage isn't working because you're trying to blend families that were never meant to be blended." Dr. Martinez, a kind woman in her 50s with graying hair and wire-rimmed glasses, glanced between us. "Margaret, can you be more specific about your concerns?" "The concerns are obvious," Robert interjected, leaning forward with a commanding presence that had intimidated countless defendants. "David is a successful attorney with a bright future. He needs a wife who can focus on building their life together, not someone distracted by remnants from a previous relationship." I felt my chest tighten, but years of navigating difficult clients as a financial advisor had taught me to maintain composure under pressure. I built my practice specifically to help blended families manage complex inheritance situations, ironically, the exact expertise that would soon become relevant in ways they couldn't imagine. "My children aren't remnants," I said quietly, my voice steady despite the anger building in my chest. "They're Lucas, age 14, and Sophia, age 12. They have names, personalities, dreams, and they're part of this family." Margaret's laugh was sharp, like crystal breaking. "Part of whose family? They're not Hendricks' children. They don't carry our name, our genetics, or our legacy. David deserves better than playing stepfather to another man's mistakes." David's intake of breath was audible. "Mom, you can't." "I can, and I will," Margaret cut him off. "We've been patient, hoping you'd see reason. But it's been 3 years, and those children are still taking time, energy, and resources away from what should be your priority, starting a real family with your wife." Dr. Martinez shifted uncomfortably in her chair. "I think we should explore what real family means to each of you." "Real family," Robert said with the certainty of someone delivering a verdict, "consists of blood relatives and children produced within a marriage. Everything else is charity work." The room fell silent except for the rain against the windows and the soft ticking of Dr. Martinez's desk clock. I thought about Lucas, who'd spent last weekend helping David rebuild our deck, their heads bent together over blueprints and power tools. I thought about Sophia, who'd started calling David Dad 6 months ago, after he attended her school play, the first father figure to show up for her since her biological father died when she was 8. "David," Margaret continued, her tone softening slightly as she addressed her son, "you're 35 years old. If you want children of your own, you need to start soon. But you can't do that properly while playing house with someone else's leftovers." That word, leftovers, hit me like a physical blow. I pressed my lips together, feeling the weight of the envelope in my purse. For weeks, I'd been carrying the trust fund documents, unsure when or if to share them with David's family. My late father-in-law from my first marriage had been a careful man, a successful businessman who'd established trusts for his grandchildren before his unexpected heart attack last month. I think," I said carefully, "we should discuss what's really at stake here." Margaret's eyes narrowed. "What's at stake is my son's future, and his future doesn't include raising another man's children when he should be focused on creating his own legacy." "Our legacy," Robert added, straightening his tie. "The Hendricks name means something in this community. David's children should carry that name and the values that come with it. David finally found his voice. Lucas and Sophia are good kids. They respect our family. They work hard in school. They're not our family, Margaret interrupted. They're visitors. And it's time for this visit to end. Dr. Martinez leaned forward. What exactly are you suggesting? Robert cleared his throat, falling into his courtroom cadence. We're suggesting that David choose, continue this marriage with someone who comes with complicated baggage, or end it and find a partner who can focus entirely on their life together. You're asking him to divorce me because I have children, I stated flatly. We're asking him to prioritize his real family over his current obligations, Margaret corrected. Those children have their own extended family from their father's side. They don't need David. The irony was almost too perfect. I thought about the meetings I'd had with the trust attorneys, the inheritance planning sessions, the careful structuring of accounts that would secure my children's futures. Lucas and Sophia didn't just have family from their father's side. They had substantial family wealth that Margaret and Robert couldn't begin to imagine. You keep talking about legacy and inheritance, I said, pulling my purse closer. Those seem important to you. Of course they're important, Robert replied. We've spent our entire lives building something to pass down. David's children should inherit property, investments, family heirlooms, not compete with outsiders for resources. Outsiders, I repeated, feeling the edges of the documents in my purse. Is that really how you see Lucas and Sophia? Margaret's mask slipped slightly, revealing the steel beneath her polished exterior. I see them as obstacles to my son's happiness and my family's continuity. David needs to choose, them or us. Choose? David's voice cracked slightly. Mom, you can't ask me to. We can, and we are, Robert said firmly. You're our only child, David. Everything we've built, everything we've saved, it's all meant for you and your future children. Real children, not some predecessor's leftovers cluttering up your life. Dr. Martinez intervened. I think we should take a step back and... No, Margaret stood abruptly, her channel suit impeccable despite her obvious agitation. We've stepped back for 3 years. We've been patient, we've been kind. We've included those children in family gatherings out of politeness. But enough is enough. She turned to face David directly, her voice taking on the tone she used when he was a child being disciplined. Your father and I have discussed this extensively. If you choose to stay married to someone who puts other people's children before your own future, you'll be choosing them over us as well. What does that mean? David asked, though his pale complexion suggested he already knew. Robert stood beside his wife, presenting a united front. It means our estate planning will reflect your priorities. If you choose to invest your life in raising another man's children instead of creating your own family, then our inheritance will go elsewhere. You're threatening to disinherit me, David said quietly. We're clarifying expectations, Margaret corrected. The Hendricks estate should benefit Hendricks' descendants. If you're not going to produce any, then perhaps your cousin Patricia's children would be more appropriate heirs. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. I watched my husband's face cycle through emotions, shock, hurt, anger, resignation. This was the family he'd spent his entire life trying to please, the parents whose approval he chased through law school, through his early career, through every major life decision. I thought about my own children probably finishing their homework at our kitchen table right now, unaware that their futures were being discussed like bargaining chips. Lucas was likely helping Sophia with her algebra, the way he did every Tuesday evening. They'd grown so much since David entered our lives, blossoming under the attention of a father figure who actually showed up. I need you to understand something, I said, my voice calm despite the storm building in my chest. Lucas and Sophia aren't bargaining chips, or obstacles, or leftovers. They're children who've already lost one parent and found stability in this family. Margaret's eyes flashed. They're not his responsibility. They have their own family inheritance, their own people. Let them rely on that instead of draining resources from David's real future. The envelope in my purse seemed to grow heavier. You mentioned their family inheritance. Whatever pittance their father left, Robert waved dismissively. David shouldn't have to supplement that with his own earning potential. I see. I pulled out my phone and scrolled to the photos I'd taken of the trust documents. Since you brought up inheritance planning, perhaps this conversation should include all the relevant financial information. Margaret's eyebrows rose slightly. What financial information? I thought about the meeting with Harrison, Whitfield and Associates 3 weeks ago, when the trust attorneys had outlined the inheritance structure my first father-in-law had established. Richard Walsh had been a quiet man, but his love for his grandchildren had been evident in every carefully planned detail. "My children's financial situation," I said simply, "since you seem to think David is supporting them out of his own resources." "Of course he is," Margaret laughed. "What else would he be doing? Teenage children are expensive. Clothes, activities, college planning. David's been shouldering those costs for 3 years." David shifted uncomfortably. We'd never discussed the specifics of my children's trust funds with his parents, assuming it wasn't relevant to our daily lives. The monthly distributions had been modest during Richard's lifetime, designed more as educational supplements than full support. But his death had triggered different provisions in the trust structure. "Actually," I said, opening the photos on my phone, "David hasn't been shouldering those costs." Robert's judge instincts kicked in. "What do you mean?" I turned my phone screen toward them, showing the first page of the trust documentation. Lucas and Sophia Walsh are the beneficiaries of the Walsh Family Educational Trust, established by their grandfather Richard Walsh in 2015. Upon his death last month, each child inherited $2 million. The silence that followed was deafening. Margaret's face went through several color changes, red to white to an unfortunate shade of gray. Robert's mouth opened and closed like a fish removed from water. $2 million? Margaret whispered. Each. Each? I confirmed, scrolling to the next page. Plus additional distributions tied to educational milestones. The trust includes provisions for sharing resources with family members who demonstrate genuine care and support for the children. David stared at me. "Why didn't you tell me the amounts had increased?" "Because the trust documents only arrived last week, and I wanted to discuss them with the attorneys before sharing details with anyone." I looked directly at Margaret, including family members who might have opinions about how outsiders should or shouldn't benefit from inheritance money. Robert found his voice first. $4 million. Between the 2 children. Actually closer to 5 when you include the education supplements and business development funds, I corrected. Richard was very thorough in his planning. Margaret sank back into her chair, her composure finally cracking. "You never said they were wealthy. You never asked about their financial situation. You were too busy calling them baggage and leftovers." I put my phone away, feeling oddly calm. "But since we're discussing family legacy and inheritance, I thought you should understand exactly what kind of baggage you're asking David to choose against." Dr. Martinez cleared her throat. "This seems like information that might change the family dynamic significantly." "Indeed it might," I agreed, "especially since the trust includes provisions for discretionary distributions to family members who contribute to the children's well-being, up to $50,000 annually per family member who demonstrates genuine familial affection." Robert's legal training kicked in. "What kind of provisions?" I pulled out the actual documents. "People who treat the children as true family members, regardless of biological connection. The trustees have considerable discretion, but the intent is clear: reward those who love and nurture these children as their own." Margaret's voice was barely a whisper. "Honorary grandparents." However, I continued, turning to a highlighted section. "The trust language is very specific about family discord. Any family member who creates emotional distress or attempts to separate the children from their chosen family structure will be permanently excluded from consideration." David was staring at his parents with an expression I'd never seen before. Disappointment mixed with something that looked like pity. "So by demanding I choose between my wife's children and my family, you've just chosen for us," Robert finished quietly, his judge's mind understanding the legal implications immediately. "By issuing that ultimatum, by calling the children baggage and leftovers, we've demonstrated exactly the kind of hostility the trust was designed to prevent." Margaret's carefully controlled facade finally crumbled. "We didn't know. You never told us they had money." "Because their money was never the point," I said firmly. "Lucas and Sophia aren't valuable because they inherited wealth. They're valuable because they're children who deserve love and family support regardless of their financial status." "But if we'd known," Margaret started. "If you'd known, you would have treated them differently based on their bank accounts rather than their character," David interrupted. "Do you understand how that sounds?" Robert straightened his tie, falling back on legal formality. "Perhaps we've been hasty in our assessment." Perhaps you've been cruel, David corrected, to children who've done nothing wrong except exist from my wife's previous marriage. I felt the weight of responsibility for what came next. The trust attorneys asked me to identify family members who should be considered for the honorary provisions. I haven't submitted those recommendations yet. The implications hung in the air. Margaret and Robert exchanged glances, 30 years of marriage allowing them to communicate without words. What would those recommendations look like? Robert asked carefully. That depends on what kind of family David chooses to build going forward, I replied. The children need grandparents who celebrate their achievements and treat them as treasured family members. Margaret's voice was small. Could we start over? With the children? That's not my decision to make. That's between you and Lucas and Sophia. I gathered the trust documents, but they're incredibly forgiving kids who've been hoping for grandparent figures in their lives. David reached for my hand. What do you need from my parents to make that possible? An apology would be a start. To the children directly for the things that were said today, and a genuine commitment to treating them as full family members. Robert nodded slowly. That seems reasonable. And family therapy. All of us together, working through the damage and building better relationships. Margaret looked up from her tissue. You'd be willing to do that? After what we said, I'd be willing to try, because Lucas and Sophia deserve grandparents who love them unconditionally. 3 months later, I sat in our kitchen watching Lucas help Robert set up a telescope in our backyard, while Sophia and Margaret pored over marine biology textbooks at the dining room table. The trust attorneys had approved my recommendations for honorary family distributions, though the money remained secondary to the relationships being built. David wrapped his arms around me from behind. Thank you for not giving up on us. They just needed to understand what they were choosing between, I replied, watching Margaret help Sophia identify sea creatures in her textbook. A family fortune or a real family. Turns out they could have both, David said. They just had to earn it. The trust fund money would secure my children's futures, but this family we'd fought to preserve was the real inheritance worth protecting.